Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Distant Relatives. I am your host, Jamal, joined by my esteemed guest, Tawona SIthole. And brother, I just want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and let the people know who you are and what it is that you do.
Thanks so much, Jamal. It's great to be here chatting to you today. I'm Tawona SIthole, and I live in Glasgow, in Scotland, and I work in education. But I got into that through my work as an artist, as a poet, a playwright, and storyteller, and musician as well. So okay. I work in academia, but I work in the arts. So those are my two areas that I work in.
Okay, now that's very interesting. So, being from Zimbabwe, how did you end up in Scotland? Like, how did you choose that to be the place that you wanted to go to?
Yeah. I think, like many young Zimbabweans, I had this whole idea of, it's almost like it's a dream to go abroad. We call it overseas, because overseas always seems a wonderful place to be. So yeah, I guess I was not unlike my peers in that regard. So when I got an opportunity to come and study in the UK, I grabbed it with even if I had more than two hands, I think I would have used them all. But I really appreciate the opportunity to leave Zimbabwe that I had.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, here's my daughter. Thank you. And, so no, I really appreciate the fact that I came on this journey, and there's been much more to discover along the way. That actually my initial ideas of thinking I'm going abroad to. I've got a little helper here. Yeah, I thought I was coming. Okay. Hello.
Hello.
There you go. No, so I really appreciate the opportunity I've had of living, outside my country of birth, and what the journey is still teaching me till now. So yeah.
So exactly how did Scotland come to be? Because usually when I hear about people moving to the UK, they'll usually, I hear London, I'll hear other places in England, but I'm not so familiar with like that experience in Scotland. So was it just that was the place that the opportunity arose, or was it a choice like that you made?
It was a choice. Interestingly, my father did a bit of traveling, and
Okay.
So my dad had been here, sort of, I think early '90s. My dad had traveled here.
Mm-hmm.
And, he stayed in London with an uncle, a relative of ours, but on one of his he liked exploring a little bit, so he traveled up north into Scotland.
Okay.
Yeah, so he loved his time here because he loved the landscape, and just came back with quite a positive feeling and reaction to Scotland. So it was in the back of my mind because of that. But no, you're quite right. It's as I found out, it was not at all like London, where there's a big community of other African people. Yeah, so that was an adventure in itself.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about like what that Black experience is like in Scotland. What is the breakdown of the demographics, and how is life there? How does it feel? Is it,
Well, it's constantly changing, but yeah, when I first moved here, I think just it was interesting on some days. You would have you would spend most of your day without seeing another African person.
Mm.
And you would have this almost gentle subconscious panic in your head, like, are there no black people at all, kind of things.
Right.
It's quite interesting. You could be even walking down the street and then you finally see this one face, you're like, wow. So you kind of do the nod, isn't it? You kind of do the nod.
Yeah, we all know the nod.
Yeah.
Especially when we're in places where it's not that many of us. So okay.
Yeah.
Same experience.
So that is changing. I think officially we are about between 0.7 and 0.8% of the population. Wow. So yeah, it has changed over the time I've been here. But yeah, that's how it feels. But there's a lot as well. Just physically how cold it is here. You can't underestimate, because I had never experienced anything like that. So even that alone makes it feel quite harsh, on top of the maybe loneliness that you can encounter.
Mm-hmm.
All those things combined can really be a lot to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. So in your experience, most of the Black population that is in Scotland are immigrants. There's no real population of people who have been there for like generations of African descent.
Yeah, by my experience, I know most people who I encounter and see will be second generation, I would say, mostly. And of those who've been here longer, and then you've got students now, and also people who are seeking asylum.
Okay,
so that's yeah. But generally, I think we're really strongly on the second generation. People whose parents maybe came to study and then settled here, that kind of thing.
And just stayed. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Right. So, all right. I mean, I get that. That makes sense. So, I wanna ask you, being someone who you said yourself you wanted to travel abroad because you had these thoughts in your mind about what that is. So, when you go back to Zimbabwe, and you speak to young people, what is your advice to the people whose goal it is to leave, or any part of Africa? If you do any work around the continent, do you have conversations with young people who that is their desire? What do you tell them about your experience and about what to expect?
Wow, yeah, this is this is an interesting one, because it's quite a hard battle, I have to say, because quite early on, I through my own experience, when I came to Glasgow, I didn't know anybody, so it was quite difficult. You're just in the deep end. I moved up from London, where I was staying with some family. I just made my own choice because I wanted to make my own way, kind of thing. And but I quickly, it took me, a few years to kind of start realizing that the journey was more than about what I initially thought it was. As a young person, being very impressionable, just looking at, if you go abroad, you can buy this, you can do this, you can do that. That was the kind of the focus of what I thought was going on. But when you move into another culture, you have to learn how to adapt into that culture. You have to learn the different acoustics, the language, different acoustics, accents, and all that kind of thing. So yeah, and spend a lot of your time speaking with strangers, which was, that was definitely my experience, you know. And so you have to tune into a whole different set of circumstances. And I then, as I was making that realization, I started feeling this strong urge to talk to other people about it. That it's quite difficult, you know, the journey is difficult for sure. But then that is where I noticed that the kind of the conflict came up, because for me, I look like someone who's very comfortable, you know, and trying to tell other people who want to be where I am that, you know, you don't want to be here, almost. That is a very difficult conversation to have. And over the years, I've learned to kind of, you know, think about it more carefully when I speak to young people. So I speak more about, because one of the things I should really say that I think there's a negative cycle of performance that is going on between, if I give the example of Zimbabwe in particular. So, you know, when people leave, because it's such a big deal, you know, you're going abroad and everyone makes a big deal of it. You know, people on average would throw big parties, for example. You know, parties like this is a big thing, and it's labeled as, you know, your life is now sorted. You made it just by getting on that plane.
Right.
You made it. Yeah. And so that then brings with it a lot of pressure. You know, because when you arrive here and things are a bit difficult, you know, to deal with that becomes quite hard for people, because the people at home are always expecting you to buy them gifts, to support them financially, to do all these things, which is a whole big pressure on its own. So, and then, so within that, I think the fear of the embarrassment of looking like you're not doing well. It causes, what I've been observing over the years, you know, we have this performance that happens. So people take loans out maybe at times, and in the say someone's going back for a month or something, they make sure that they go out there, and there's a lot of, you know, I'm calling it performance, you know, kind of exhibiting some signs of whatever people think are material items that show that they're doing well.
Right. No, I definitely, and you know, just to chime in a little bit, like I am from the United States, and I have, you know, had the opportunity to live abroad, to live in Africa, to live in, you know, on other continents. And I have also, you know, known people who, you know, recently immigrated, and, you know, what that experience looks like. And I've been, you know, privy to be able to see that performance, to be able to see people struggling, but, you know, not actually telling their family and friends back home the realities of their situation, because, you know, people put, you know, whole families pool money together for that one person to be able to get the visa, to be able to go through the entire process. So they look at that person as an investment, right?
Yeah.
And so we're investing this into this opportunity for you to go abroad and gain everything that, you know, is available outside of where we come from. And the expectation, like you said, is that, you know, that investment will pay back off to those family members and those, you know, friends of the family. But what they don't know, and what, you know, you don't know until you get here, that being Europe or the United States, is that life is hard.
Yeah.
The living expenses are much higher. So because most of the time people look at, oh man, people over there are making so much money. What could I do with that money here? So you transform the money that people are making abroad to the cost of living of where you currently are, not to the cost of living of where they actually will be making that money. So the money they're actually bringing home isn't that much, right? And so you don't really factor those things in. And then the realities of just being a black person out in Europe and in the United States doesn't really cross people's minds, because if you're coming from Africa and everybody around you is black, race isn't the first thing, that comes across your mind either. And so the realities of dealing with, racism and bigotry and discrimination and those things doesn't really, you don't know the realities of how harsh they are until you step out into that, that part of the world. So, so I've actually had those conversations just like you, and just like you were saying, it's difficult to get people to understand. I lived in Guinea, and I have spent time in Mali and Senegal and in other places, and they would always, talking to young people, they would say, America is like a little paradise. And I was like, well, not really, and not for me, and I'm from there. And I can tell you that, as us, as black people, it is not that. Not saying that the opportunities aren't available at all. Yes, there are, but it is much more difficult than you imagine it to be based on what you are being presented in the media. So what role do you think media plays in that mindset, and what can be done to, like, people like us, like people like yourself, who you now know the realities? What can you say, or what can you do to try to counteract or just add to the narrative of what the realities are of living abroad?
Wow, yeah, Jamal, really well said. I really appreciate when you're talking about, the idea of blackness kind of becoming a thing. All of a sudden, it doesn't even, it doesn't really affect you that much when you're in Zimbabwe, which is predominantly, and then when you come here, that's also, you're in this spotlight.
Right.
Suddenly, there's no place to, retreat into. You're just in the spotlight. You're noticed. You're asked lots of questions. People have an interest in you, positive or otherwise, but it's there constantly. So that's a hard thing to deal with. It's like walking onto a bus, and kind of that whole thing. But yeah, I think one of the things that happened is that we take the way we deal with information, I think, is quite interesting, because as far as we see snippets, and we build a big picture from those snippets. So for for a lot of young people in Africa, they see celebrities, and that transforms. Somehow, it sort of transforms into, okay, this is the average life, music videos,
right?
This is what people consume, and so I think there's something within storytelling that's important. Theater is important, drama, theater, film can help us to kind of, because we relate on a personal level. We want to see a character who we can relate with. So a character maybe in a film, in a story, is easier to relate to than talking about, broader terms. So I think there's something in that, because we get, if you ask, if you ask your average, if you stop 100 kids in Zimbabwe or any other of the African countries I visit, or I've visited before, a good number of those, I would say, probably, in any situation, most of those kids, if you ask them a place they would really love to be, without them really even thinking about why or anything, they will name the US, UK, Canada, or somewhere in Europe.
Right.
And that's no coincidence, because I think it's been a long term as well forming. If you think about where we've been, in terms of take information, if we go back, if we retreat right back to, we talked about TV, and if we retreat back into even our schooling,
Right.
so ideas form from a very young age. So when we start, for me, I was very fortunate that I had storytelling and kind of folklore as part of my upbringing as well, alongside the schooling. But if you look at the schooling, you basically go to a school where the language of instruction
Right.
is not your native language. Straight away.
And let me ask you something before you even continue on that.
Yeah.
Is it penalized while you're in your formal education if you speak your native tongue?
It used to be.
Okay.
But things changed.
Because I know that was a reality that I saw in Guinea, and my wife was telling me, who is from Guinea, was telling me that that was something that, was penalized. If they didn't speak French in school, then they were penalized for speaking their own African tongue in schools in Africa. And I was very, taken aback by that. But go ahead and continue.
No, but you're right on the. So what happened for me, for my example, my older brothers and sisters, when they were going to school, they were penalized and actually punished if they used. But then, as with everything that has happened in our societies, we are penalizing each other in other ways.
Right. Okay.
So it went into a different kind of punishment. So socially, it's not cool to speak your native language, So that's why you get penalized. The cool people are the ones who speak English in a certain way, pronounce it in a certain way. Accents are a big deal, Like schools, people judge on how good schools are by the way the young people who go to those schools speak. In Zimbabwe, where the famous saying about, because this is an obsession with the Queen's English.
Right. Okay.
And there's this joke about kids who went to these schools and tried to speak the Queen's English so much that they were trying to speak through their nose. So they were called the nose brigade in the streets.
Got you. See, that's interesting, because this isn't the first time that I've come across this story. I hear this narrative so often when I speak to my friends from the continent. And I've even heard that from somebody that, they didn't speak their national language because it wasn't cool, their ethnic language because it wasn't cool. And they would speak English, and they would also speak like the pidgin English before they would speak their own actual language. Something that, we as African Americans can't identify with because we don't know where we come from. So it kind of is, baffling a little bit. But when you understand the context of the history of colonization, the same way that, our minds have been conditioned as descendants of being enslaved, the same type of conditioning from Europeans, the whitewash of, knowledge comes from Europe and development comes from Europe, happened during colonization too. So, Africa got hit on two sides. We were robbed of people, and then the people came back and then took over the actual house as well. And so it is just doubly devastating. What I would like to say, like, from your perspective as an artist, as somebody who is a playwright, as somebody who can contribute in the media, what type of stories do you believe would assist in bringing more self-efficacy and more empowerment to people to realize that there are certain things that can be done on the continent to, you know, from the people who are already there with the resources that we have, there is a possibility to create that advancement or that development ourselves without always, you know, looking to go somewhere else or always looking for a handout from somewhere else. How can art be influential, and what type of art do you believe that you could possibly add to that narrative?
Yeah, yeah, it goes quite far, you know. If just an example for you, I like you talked about, you know, knowledge creation, and this is the whole thing. You go through school from you know, primary school as we call it till you finish, and you know, your average experience of that is you will not see an African thinker within all the studying that you do. Yeah, it will just be so you can't blame the young people, and you know, but for I think what's really important is if you look at if I use my own example, you know, there was something really important about my family being quite into the folklore and me experiencing that alongside, because I have something to refer back to, you know.
Right.
So there's first of all, it's about, unfortunately, where we're starting from, you need to go to a certain level and gain the ears of other people, you know, on the continent before you can you need yeah, unfortunately, you need to be endorsed by the authority that people respect, and then
Right.
over time you can maybe get out of that, you know. So if I can speak and say, okay, you know, I have a role within UNESCO, I have a role within the University of Glasgow, it makes people say, okay, this guy must know what he's talking about.
Because
So
you've been validated by those other people.
Yeah, so you can use that as well. But what I found really made sense for me on my own journey of my own learning to learn the things that had been so ingrained in me. You look at basic things, you know, some of the most important lessons I've had in my life were given to me by people who by conventional standards would be called illiterate, or grandparents who didn't do the whole book knowledge thing.
Right.
So, but their way of, you know, generating, maintaining, transmitting knowledge is a different curriculum from the one I went to through the schooling system. So, starting to appreciate where that lies, and even looking at, you know, if you look at how things have transformed, you know, even naming systems, you know, the first name, second name format we use, you know, it's not necessarily a universal system.
Right. Right.
Noticing those things and kind of going, oh, okay. But within art, it allows you, because for me, you know, I prefer to go by my ancestral name, which is Ganyamatope. And this name, I can use it within the art world. I can call myself what I want to, you know. In the formal context, obviously, I have to write first name, second name. But by just even that small thing, by just renaming how you present yourself, you know, so much has kind of been already taken away, because, you know, so my name, when I say Ganyamatope, I am referring to more than myself. Included in that name is the whole line of those who carved me. You know, my ancestors are standing with me on that name.
Right.
So I'm doing two things, you know. I am recognizing the journey that has been made for me to be where I am now. Most importantly, I am not being individualistic. I am showing that, you know, I owe, you know, the things I've learned, the experience I have, to, you know, I'm in the hands of other people, which is a great metaphor for our life anyway. You know, we are in the hands of other people in our own life. So I am accrediting the collective rather than the individual. And if you look how we live our lives now, we live more individualistic lifestyle. So yeah, being in the arts allows me to say, yeah, Ganyama Tobino, that's my bio. I give everybody, I'd rather be known by that name. And those who I relate with closely, they call me that name, and these ancestral names that it was a system that, before the 1800s, before colonization came, those are the uses of names that were going on. But now it seems like it's impossible to do it. But yeah, trying to reclaim that space where we can say, no, there is knowledge. In my grandparents who walked around in their bare feet, roaming the country and knowing herbs and telling stories and all that. Those people were knowledgeable too. It's not just my institutional teachers who are important. So there's something interesting in that. I guess.
I'm happy that you brought that up, because that reminds me of one of my favorite books, and it's called Sabah, The Reawakening of the African Mind. And Dr. Asa Hilliard, who's the author of that book, talks about valuing knowledge. And he talks about how, there's a European system of values of education, as well as an ancient African system of education. And when he spoke about ancient Africa, it was talking about all the way back to Kemet, all the way back to Nubia, all the way back to Ethiopia. And you can trace that those same learning systems and values can even be found in other regions of, modern pre-colonial Africa. You can find it in West Africa. You can find it in, Central as well as Southern. And what it was is, when the Europeans came, they created this value system of, do you know what I know? And I will base my appreciation of your intellect based on if you know the information that I know, whether it's been presented to you ever or not. Do you know what I know? And if you don't know what I know, then your knowledge is here. And the best way of thinking, instead of asking leading questions of, do you know what I know, is to ask, what do you know? Because you may know things that I don't know. Because if you were to ask me the same question, if I ask you, do you know what I know? And you don't know what I know, so I lower your education, and then you turn around and ask me the same thing, and I have no idea of the things that you know, then we both seem ignorant to one another. We both seem lower on the spectrum of intelligence to one another. But if you come together and say, okay, what do you know? Well, I know agriculture. I know, mathematics. I know the constellations. I know how they come together. And then I ask you, what do you know? And you say, well, I know literature. I know phonetics. I know these principles. And not only do you actually start to value someone else's intelligence, you actually gain something from one another. There is a possible exchange of knowledge and a growth on both ends, because now, based on what you know and my appreciation of it, I can now learn agriculture, and I can now learn phonetics and understand how that system can advance what it is that I'm doing, and how because we know things based around our environments and what is important to our survival. It's like a rabbit asking an elephant, does he know how to hop? Well, an elephant doesn't need to hop. It's not important to their survival. It's not something that they would develop, evolutionarily. And it's the same way when people from different places try to devalue the worth or the value of someone else's knowledge based on their own centrality. And so, those things are definitely something that have to be discussed. And the only way that people will grow is making sure that when you ask people certain things, or when you enter into another person's environment, that you don't lose yourself, in their environment, right? Don't forget where you come from or your own values, but also be open enough to see what values exist there instead of comparing everything based on where you come from or what it is that you see. So my next question, and I just want to stay on the arts because you're an artist and you work in the realm of creating new narratives, new media through that spectrum. And I believe that a lot of the times in Western education, the arts kind of get pushed to the side as almost like a novelty. However, if you really look at how most people gain their knowledge or confirm what they know, it's a lot of the time based on stories, based on nursery rhymes. We learn our alphabets in a song. We learn so much about, what we know through music, through media, through painting, through so many different manifestations of art that to devalue it is very silly if you think about it. So there have been so many artistic recently manifestations coming from African Americans who have been trying to reclaim our African identity. There have been a lot of acceptance and praise over these things as well as pushback. And two of the main ones that come to mind are the movie Black Panther, as well as the most recent addition is Beyonce's Black is King. And so I've heard points on either side, and through the arts, like I said, people can easily take in that information or at least be exposed to it to want to learn more. So have you heard about, both of these films, as well as have you heard any of the backlash that have come from either of them?
Yeah, I have seen Black Panther, and I'm aware of the conversations that happened around that. And yeah, I think what's interesting to me, just to kind of follow on from what you were saying, I think there's the problem of how we view knowledge as if it's something disembodied. I guess this is, it can go into maybe philosophy, this idea of the mind. What is the mind? It's not in the body. But if you look at knowledge as something that is embodied, and it's something that is actually earthed as well, right. we learn the kind of the land. This is part of the thing with the land. The land is the teaching kind of resource for me. I know for definite that my grandparents would use the land as a big teaching resource. And I think everything you're saying is true. We kind of, if you think about, I guess there's a dissociation that happens, but if you think about even just if you think about intuition, I went to a talk and it was mentioned in this talk. I really like this, that if you think about qualities like intuition, that people might say, oh, logic is put a lot of emphasis in logic, but this speaker was talking about intuition being such a powerful quality, because if you think about the biggest decisions in our lives, make them based on intuition. It's who you spend your life with, getting married, like we both are, choosing a house that you live in. You can see how many properties, and the person telling you the property might tell you the kind of the the space, the area, the square footage, whatever. But that's not what makes you pick a place you live in.
Mm.
You walk in somewhere and you feel something. You kind of go, yeah. You know, I have a certain kind of feeling there. And if you think about, you know, even I've been thinking about this recently, the idea of the spoken word, the power of the spoken word.
Mm.
You know, life is pronounced in the spoken word. You know, when people get married, for example, the moment, you know, guests come for the whole thing, and they watch, but the point of union is the moment when you speak those words to each other.
Mm.
You know, your guests don't know what you sign. You know, afterwards you go and sign some paper, but that's not the point that people, you know, recognize the union.
Right.
In that spoken word, the moment you speak to each other and say, yes, we make this promise, you do the ritual of whatever you do. I don't know, you know, exchanging rings or whatever people do, but it's that the power of that spoken word. You know, we cannot dissociate it from,
right,
you know, our very important moments in life. You know, in a bereavement, the most important thing that happens is not, you know, the logistics of, you know, when is this going. It's those words that are spoken and offered to everyone who is hurting.
Mm.
You know, these are moments of our lives. And story, you know, what is not story in mathematics? You have to know what is the story before you can start working it out.
Mm.
You know, it takes a train going at such and such a speed, X amount of time to reach somewhere. If it was going at X amount of speed, what time will it take to get there? You have to build the story before you can start tackling that problem. When you're sick, you go to the doctor. What does the doctor want to learn from you? The history of what's been going on. You know, what are the symptoms? When did they start? How are they manifesting? You have to tell a story.
Yeah.
Even, you know, so it's interesting that so this it's kind of, what I find fascinating is, whilst all this is being said, it's already in there. You know, we're already living and practicing it. So it just needs to be noticed more that it's already there. You know.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, definitely, and it's just interesting to me, and I'm everything that you just said with the ceremonial things that even exist in the context of Western culture, where people don't even know the date that people sign the marriage certificate, because most of the time you don't know that is not the actual date of the wedding. Sometimes the marriage certificate is signed before the wedding, sometimes it's signed like a week afterwards, and but your anniversary is the day that the ceremony happened, right? And which is very interesting, because people, without thinking, we do put value over the ceremonial, over the artistic, you know, manifestation of some of these things that we do in life. Even when you talked about, you know, one of the most important decisions you can make is where you're going to live and place your family. And most of the time, you don't make those decisions off of, okay, these are the statistics of the area. There are a lot of people who consider those things, but they kind of take a back seat to that feeling of how does my wife feel? How do my children feel about the neighborhood that we're moving into? What is my sense of security? There's no real, like, definitive, you know, accurate way to assess if a place is secure or not. You can look at crime stats or whatever, but that really doesn't tell a story, like you alluded to. But you get a sense of, I feel comfortable in this place, or I don't feel comfortable in this other place that may have all the stats and the school of the, you know, of the crime rate of everything. But over here, something about it is pulling me and I'm gravitating toward over here. And you will see that sometimes people will make decisions based on logic and ignore the gravitational pull, and then will later a test of how they regret not listening to their gut feeling.
Yeah.
Right. And so those things are very interesting. And so I wanted to just talk about the realities of the backlash of those media that kind of happened, because I've heard people claim that, African Americans are culturally appropriating African culture, which to me, as a person who really doesn't even identify, my American citizenship is a status of legality, but it is not an identifier. It is not a part of my identity. I hold American citizenship legally, but I am an African who just happened to be born and live in the United States. That is not, something that identifies who I am as a person. My origin and my lineage comes from Africa. I know that. I know that, we can go to Ghana, we can go to Sierra Leone, we can go to Senegal, we can go to Guinea and visit the dungeons that are called, the door of no return. Like, I know that my ancestors, I don't know exactly who they were or where they come from or what place they came from and when, but I know for a fact historically that they came from this place. So it is baffling to me how, people can say that people trying to reclaim something that has been stolen from them is appropriating a culture that belongs to them. What are your thoughts on that?
This is a symptom of a bigger problem, which, there's an idiom they use, in my mom's language in Shona, and it's kuanda huya, where, we recognize the collective as, bringing more, to our life, and this kind of goes to struggles with identity and the insecurities that brings with it, right. Because the kind of it's like for me, as a poet, if I sit and watch a poet performing, I can just enjoy what that person is doing and say, oh my goodness, this person has just blown me away. Or I can start, allowing or sort of entertaining some little feeling of like, oh, if I could be doing what, it's that kind of thing of somewhat we should learn to appreciate the majesty of others or the magnificence of others, and this is why we have a lot of problems with this, what you're describing to me, and I've heard so much of this coming and going, but this is in its most basic form, I see it as tribalism. This unhealthy because you know what, Jamal, why should something that you do threaten me? You see, this is the question. What is it that I'm threatened by? Because when you have done something, why can't I look at that thing and applaud it and say, wow, Jamal has done well here, without adding an unnecessary spice on top of it?
Right.
This is a big problem that it goes around, and it's the kind of language that, it really keeps us down as well. In our, I'll tell you something that you've probably experienced this, but if you go to most places and you see someone, let's say the car mechanic, just for a simple example.
Okay.
You put a car mechanic on one side, run by a black guy, put one next to it, run by a white guy. Where will people go?
People will go to the person descended from Europe. Even those who are Black will value that person's knowledge over somebody who, you know, comes from where they come from. And like you said, it is a symptom of bigger things, because we see that in different contexts, right? I see it here in the United States. There is this idea that there is only space for one, right? And you see it in comedians, you'll see it in actors, you will see it expressed across, you know, educational fields, in the arts, in sports, where we feel like, okay, if this person made it, that is decreasing my opportunity or chance to make it. So instead of helping each other train to become the best that we can be, now I'm going to turn my attention to focus in and zone in on that person and try to limit their success and halt them down, and thinking that by pulling them down, that's the only way to propel myself. And I've seen that happen as well in our activism, in the people who will fight for the, you know, the rights of our people or fight for our positioning. I've seen it happen in our leadership, where the leader or an organization wants to be the one that represents Black people, so they will not collaborate and not share the audience or promote other people who are trying to accomplish the same thing. This platform right here, Distant Relatives, my entire goal is to present to an audience that I am building that there are other people doing the same work. The reason that I do that is to show that it's not a novelty. It's not an impossibility. There are other ways to look at doing the same work or reaching the same goal. You are an artist, you're a poet, you're a playwright, and you have an affinity for Africa and wanting to educate your people and give them a new way of looking at things. I want to do the same thing, and I do it in the context from which, you know, I've been educated and trained. But I believe that we can support one another. We can build each other up. We can expose your audience to the things that I am doing. I can expose my audience to the things that you're doing, and everybody wins. Everybody can eat. But that mentality doesn't really, it's not permeated, because what we are presented with most of the times is that, all right, I'm only going to hire one of you. And that is what we're so used to. We're so used to other people holding our fate that even when we are the boss, even when we control our own narrative, we stay in the position of them dangling only one carrot in front of 5 people. And only one person is going to get that carrot, right? And so you're going to have to fight each other over it. But even when there is nobody holding up a carrot and there are 5 carrots right in front of them, we are only looking as if it is one, right? And so we have to retrain and recondition ourselves, most definitely. I wanted to move along and ask you.
Jamal,
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just want to add something to that. Thanks so much, for breaking that down, because I want to just add that, it's this idea of we commodify everything, unfortunately. There is enough space for everyone to do, make, create, shine, do everything. The space is there. As we live, I cannot stand on the ground you're standing. You have gifts that I I don't have, I have some gifts that you don't have, but we know it's about us. Your wellness is my wellness too. This is the baseline that we struggle, but we commodify, let's say, we commodify this idea of thinking that, you doing well has somehow taken the portion of doing well out of my part.
Right. Exactly.
You know, and that is absolutely, to me, that's such a crazy kind of mentality, you know. And you're quite right. We observe it a lot. You know, sometimes, you know, you enter situations where you know that the greater threat you're going to have is from someone else, you know, of your similar background, because that feeling of being threatened. And it's one of the reasons why we're struggling to get over tribalism, you know, to
exactly.
You know, this whole idea, you know, we commodify everything. There's only space for one, you know. What is this space that we've created in our heads, you know?
Mm-hmm.
There's room for every language, every custom, everything, as long as we just respect each other. And for me as well, I'm from the praise poetry culture, where, you know, our names, the ancestral names, they're associated with praise poetry that comes with it. And when you hear performing their praise poetry, it's the most beautiful thing. And it makes you also feel really energized. You know, it doesn't make you feel like, oh, you know, the people of the elephant totem or the ant totem or whatever are, you know, performing their stuff, so I feel threatened. I better. No, it's not like that at all.
Right. Yeah, and I like what this comment says from Linda. It says, also, when we help each other, it creates even more space.
Brilliant.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And that is very true. When we help one another, we start to become the people in those positions that are making those decisions, like I said before. So instead of thinking that, okay, I'm hiring one Black person, right, to meet this quota, now I'm thinking I own the company. Now I have space to hire as many of my people as possible. And going in with that intention. If I make it, I'm bringing everybody up with me and giving everybody access to the information. And I like LeBron James. LeBron James, one of the top basketball players. Yeah. The thing that I love about him is, you know, what you hear about most athletes is you need to separate yourself from your friends that you grew up with, because they'll pull you down. Well, what he did was he took 5 of his closest friends that he grew up with, and I don't know how they came to the decision, but I believe they had a conversation and he talked to them and was like, okay, what are you guys interested in doing? And he paid for his friends to become educated and gave them the keys to mingle and be in the room with the people that they needed to learn from. One of his friends manages his sports agency. Like, he, of course, when he signed to the NBA, he had to sign to some sports agent, but he was like, okay, you, my best friend, I want you to learn everything about sports agency as you can. And when you do, I'm going to leave these other people and you're going to represent me. And by virtue of you representing me, then you will also gain other clients from other sports and even the same sport, because your validity will go through you representing me. Oh, you over here, you're interested in television production. Well, I want a TV production company. So I want you to go to school and learn everything about TV production as possible. And you will run my media company. So he has another one of his friends who produces all of his movies, all of his documentaries, all of the TV shows that you see produced by LeBron James is actually being run day to day by one of his friends that he grew up with. And then if you go through all five of them do something different that built up his empire. But instead of them dragging him down and making him do crazy things like we see with a lot of athletes, he had a conversation with them and he built them up based on their strengths. They're not the star basketball player. They can't do what he does on the court. But because of what he can do on the court, he had access to other celebrities, access to other markets, access, of course, to the funding to make sure that they got what they needed. And now they're executing on all cylinders.
Yeah.
This is what we can do as a people. That's one example of one person in a group of friends where he was able to elevate them. And now they've built an empire. Now think about, as a Black experience, if I'm the first one through the door, and when I get through the door, my whole goal is to throw the rope back and say, all right, I'm going to get through this door. I'll break through the barrier first. And when I do, you let me know how you want to operate. And then I will set you up based on my reference point. And by people valuing who I am, I'll set you up with the meeting and the knowledge and the proclivity to the people and the things that you need to know. And then you will be able to run full speed towards your goal. And it will all build toward the same goal of all of us being prosperous and just productive in the world. And, we create the space.
Yeah.
We start to push the boundaries. People telling us that the sky is the limit, and we even remove the sky and we say, you know what? There is no limit. I don't want to hear anything about limits, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's just one thing that I always want to make sure that the people who are engaged in anything that is produced by Afrikan Unity Initiative, unity is a main goal. But initiative is also in that because we have something to do. We have a part to play. We're not just sitting idly by waiting for things to happen for us. We're taking the narrative back. We're controlling it. We're taking the power back and saying, this is what we can contribute. Now, brother, you being from Zimbabwe, there is a lot of things in the news right now happening in Zimbabwe. And I really would like your take on it, because even in the articles that I've read and the news reports that I've seen, I still can't really get a feeling of what actually is happening, right? And so I need, just from your experience personally, as well as, you having family back in Zimbabwe, I would like to know what the general feelings are. So one of the first things I came across was this Zimbabwean Lives Matter hashtag that has started to, pick up some steam. And of course, it models after the Black Lives Matter hashtag that we use here in the States to combat police brutality and a lot of our injustices that we face as, Africans in the United States. So the Zimbabwean Lives Matter, what I read was that there are some protests that are happening, and, people are being, arrested for peaceful protests. Tell me a little bit of what you know about the situation, and what are the, the thoughts from you as well as the people on the ground still in Zimbabwe.
Yeah, well, when you live abroad, you have a greater challenge. Just referring back to what we talked about earlier, you are living in two realities. You are living your connection with the family, who you left on the ground, and you're living in the new space you're in. And so this is you're always trying to balance all these things. So yeah, we are in a Zimbabwe as a country is going through many difficulties. And for a while there've been all these struggles, and recently, all these reports are coming out and things that are going on. And I think my reflection on it is really, some of the time, when you're away, you kind of rely on information that you're just seeing and hearing about. So sometimes it kind of it feels like, when you're on the ground, you can make better assessments. So this connection, sometimes you recognize that you are a little bit out of touch. Sometimes you have to keep on retuning in. But my big thing is, of all the things that are being reported and being mentioned, it's very unfortunate that these things are being described and going on, and I feel like the people in that arena of making that change, people who are in the political arena, who are players in that arena, who have that agency.
Mm-hmm.
We just talked about, as you were saying just now, this idea of coming together and trying to share that space, that vision, despite differences, despite disagreements even. I think it's an ongoing challenge that it seems to be elusive for us, to just come to that point where we can, you and I can disagree and still understand that, okay, ultimately we're trying to go in the same direction. And I think we are struggling on that level, even on even in a social level. We seem to do things very much in a binary way. If you're not here, you're there. If you're not there, you're here. I think even conversation, I noticed even in the public sphere, sometimes people struggle to just say, well, I don't agree with this idea, but it doesn't mean I am now against that person. So I think
right.
For me, to a basic level, that's what I really, my wish is for us to, work on that, work on how to disagree with each other, but still, go in the same direction. It's
Learn.
a thing that I think it's an ongoing journey that we're on. We really need to learn that, where if I disagree with what you're saying, it doesn't mean I am hostile to you personally.
Right.
I think as a basic point, that's my observation really. And I think for me as an artist, I love the artistic space, because that's where I think I give my contribution, to society. And I feel like, working with young people and trying to using theater and drama as a way of us exploring, our history, where we've come from, because a lot of the things we're performing have been formed quite a long time ago. Our sense of self, we haven't really actualized it in many ways. So we've got those journeys to go. We're on this journey of, the phrase that is used about decolonizing the mind.
Right.
Still held by a lot of these things. As I mentioned, tribalism before. These are things that we are still struggling to reach that point. And
so
I think it's going to take some time for us to reach a certain level where we can say, yeah, we're getting over those things.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned like how to disagree without taking it personal or as a personal jab, because just because I may agree with an idea that you have does not mean that you are my enemy, or that your very existence is a threat to mine, right? There needs to be space for people to be able to speak freely with one another about their varying opinions on, different topics that will, shape the standards and, how different countries or different political systems grow. We have that problem here in the States as well, where if you disagree with me politically, then your very existence needs to, to go away. And that type of, competition reared thinking must be contained, must be maintained. And we have to retrain how we view these things. One of the reasons that I even started this YouTube page is to have different shows on different topics and bring people in from different places, because I don't know that everybody that I bring on here is going to have the exact same experience as me or the same exact opinions, but I come on here to learn. And what I do with these platforms is I model how to have a conversation. That's one of the things that I try to do. Like when you're speaking, I'm not just waiting for you to stop so that I can say the next thing. I'm listening to what you're saying so that I can gain understanding of what your perspective is. And then with the hopes that when I speak, you are listening to gain an understanding of what I mean. Now, understanding doesn't mean agreement. I can listen to you and really say, I now understand why that person believes that way. Not that I completely agree, but now I do have a better understanding of how to engage with that person, because now I know based on these experiences, this is why they are, are an advocate of this. And it doesn't always have to be agree or disagree. It may be you're passionate about something and I just don't really have that much interest in that realm. But it doesn't mean that I disagree with you. But when I gain a better understanding of why that pulls you, then it will make more sense for me, right? Because everything isn't right or wrong. I like football more than I like basketball, but I'm not sitting here trying to convince somebody who loves basketball that I'm right and they're wrong. It's a preference, right? And so everything isn't always mutually exclusive. Just because I am more on one side and more, privy to this and you're more privy to that, doesn't mean that there's no room for us to gain understanding and even work together. And so, what I did read about the Zimbabwean Lives Matter issue, and I will continuously read more about it, because when we talk about Afrikan Unity Initiative, we actually want to bring awareness firsthand about what's happening around the African diaspora. That means continental, that means Caribbean, that means in North America, as well as South America and Central and Europe as well. And I'm so glad that I got back in touch with you, because if you would have asked me, do you think about Scotland when you're thinking about the African diaspora? I would have definitely had to be honest and say, no, I don't. But that doesn't mean that a part of the diaspora does not exist in those areas, right? And so we have to know what's happening there as well, if our unity is going to build this force where we can actually stand in and up for one another, to decrease the opportunities of our exploitation, of our, further oppression, of degradation, and those things. Because I believe that as long as we stay isolated from one another and not know what's happening, then we will be forever vulnerable to other people taking advantage of us and that vulnerability and that isolated state. So I will do my best to, stand in support of those protesters who are wanting more representation, wanting more opportunities from the economy, and wanting to, actually be able to gain opportunities in their home country and make advances in Zimbabwe. And the reality is that this is the experience across the African diaspora. And so we must be vigilant and must be supportive of one another. Another thing that I did see in the news is that there has been some type of promise, and I'm not sure, if everything has been signed, but I know it has at least been verbally agreed upon that $3.5 billion will be given to white farmers in Zimbabwe for, the displacement that happened at the hands of former President Robert Mugabe, who wanted to make sure that those lands actually went back to the people of Zimbabwe. Now, I'll say this: when I heard about this, of Robert Mugabe actually making that decision about taking the land away from those, white farmers who came to Zimbabwe as, colonists and invaders, and just took land without asking for permission, when it was taken back, when we were able to stand up and say, all right, enough of this. We are in a position of power to make this decision. Let's take it back. It was, a sense of pride as an African even living abroad, right? And now that I see that it's pretty much a reversal, and this to me, as a descendant of people who were enslaved, who have been fighting for reparations for, over 2 centuries, to hear that an African nation is essentially paying reparations to people who came to colonize is insulting, honestly. What are your thoughts on this, and just how is this a thing?
Sorry, I'm just going to rewind a little bit to the listening. Just a comment on listening. So listening is very important for me as a practice. It's one of the things that my elders really impressed upon me. Mm-hmm. That listening I'm constantly reminding myself to go deeper and deeper into listening as a practice. Listening, even though it is one of the things that we can do, involuntarily. It's before we can even walk. It takes a human. Whilst it takes a zebra maybe an hour to be up on its feet and start walking, but the human will take at least a year before we're up on our feet. But we're already listening at that time. So it's quite interesting how this becomes very difficult as we grow up. I guess we want to be heard or something. But so listening to the practice is very, very important, because, as you were saying, it allows us to really appreciate other points of view, and this can only build us. So yeah, for me, listening it's a real practice that we need to get better at, because when you enter a conversation, you're always going to come out transformed. Mm-hmm. And you don't come out transformed by what you say. You come out transformed by what you have been listening to. And so I started to kind of throw that one in. But also there's a proverb I love. They say, which means ears, they have no other job. They're not out in the field working, they're just there. They're doing their job. But yeah, we need to, it's something that I constantly remind myself to get back into the practice of listening in well. So now, the land question, I'm going to address this as a custodian of the ancestors' culture.
Okay.
Yeah, in my name as Ganyamatope. There are a few things that have happened in the course of our history that we have now embraced and accepted for many different reasons. But I want to go back to the idea of commodification again. So from where you stand, you can look at the land as a commodity, or you can look at it as a spiritual entity. So that already sort of creates the kind of the placement where you're looking at this from. So if you look at the kind of, there will always be, political situations along our history line. But if you look at the kind of the ancestors' philosophy of the land, the land is more than just, this physical thing that we're dealing with, but it is the oldest ancestor we have, because, you know, everyone returns there. Even the ancestors we speak of, their bones are in there. Some of our bones, of the ones who were lost in the sea, their bones are under the sea, they're in the land, right? So this land, I think, from my lifestyle and from the elders who have brought me, it's, the land is not a commodity, according to these wise people I've learned from. And so what happened to us along the way, and even the chiefs in ancient times, their job was to, I guess, to be, to supervise, maybe, you know, the use of the land, because in our culture we speak about kuyera. Kuyera is this term that means something that is so precious and sacred. So the idea of kuyera. So the way that the land was viewed, we had a portion that we needed to use to change the use of the land for constructing our homesteads. Okay, that's fine. Our fields for farming, to support our livelihood, that's fine. But the rest of the lands were considered as kuyera. Lands that were left untouched. You know, it's interesting now that science is catching up and talking about green belt and you know, carbon, you know. And so in that system, we restricted ourselves from overusing the land, you know, we're facing all these things, deforestation, all these things are happening. And the things that we may look down on as taboos or superstitions were actually codes of protecting land. Because on the land is where you learn your most basic lessons. As a child, your feet are taken by an elder and stamped into the earth to announce your arrival. It is in that same land that you will grow your food that you eat. It is walking on that same land that you will go long journeys. It is also from that same land that you will, you know, heal yourself if you're sick. You know, all these things. It is in these lands that we bury our elders too. You know, so the land is much, much, much more than a commodity that is bought and sold. And in turn, the argument is against ownership, because ownership of land is a concept that we readily accept, but there's a question mark on that too. Because the land will always own us. As we're making our journeys, we're on our way to getting at some point we're going to go in there and rest. So there was this massive shift in how, I guess, you know, territorial kind of battles that have happened along, you know, along the way. And so especially the kind of the expansion of the empire, you know, of the British Empire, brought this kind of taking of lands, many indigenous lands. You know, I saw an article recently about one of the tribes in California, what is now California, getting back their ancestral lands recently. So yeah, so land. So in the expansion of the empire, this idea of ownership came, and you know, land was reapportioned and everything, and that began a situation that was never really. So I feel like when we finally overcame that situation of being under colonial rule, we missed something. The place of authority had shifted from the elders' wisdom. We now had a new social structure, a new social legal justice structure that now relied on different authority, the authority of the inherited structure of administering, governing the land. We didn't return to the elders to say, look, these lands that had been grabbed from us, you have guided us, because it's our ancestors that guided us to overcome those battles. Right. So I think we missed something when we did not return to say, you know, the lands have returned. Because the lands were not for I definitely, you know, I want somewhere to live and have space to have my livelihood. But the idea of mass, because if you think about the idea of mass ownership of land, that is an issue with me. But yeah, so we accepted this new ideology, I guess, this new way of looking at the land, and even at independence, which was an opportune moment to say, yeah, you know, the land can return to its original state of being preserved and looked after.
Mm.
And unfortunately, even socially, you know, the taboos that our ancestors held, you know, we mock them, we make fun of them. And you know, I associate with a lot of elders for my age. You know, if when I'm in Zimbabwe, you know, the people I hang around with, you know, people of my age but older people, and I go on some walks with some of the elders, and you know, it's incredible what's on the land. You know, what has been left, what has to be preserved. So I see the land in that way. I'm not someone who looks at the land as like, oh, you know, it's like something I can own and it can. So I think there is something about that is accepting the idea of land as a commodity is an initial problem for me.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole ownership thing, obviously colonizers wanted to own it, you know, to
Right.
expand and do all this mass farming, and then even the kind of the crops we were growing, like now maize is the staple of my home country Zimbabwe, but there are three grains, small grains, you know, mungarukweza and the mapunde that our ancestors used to eat, which were more suited to the climate and have much more, you know, greater health benefits. So even that alone as well is all in the mix. So yeah, I think we inherited a lot as we have done. You know, we inherited the colonial system, and we still have a long way to try and unlock it.
Right. Right.
You know, our values, we didn't impress our values upon it as well as we could have done. I feel. So we embraced that and just said, yeah, okay. We
So
just
you believe. So you believe that this deal or this promise is because, you know, at the time of, you know, the exchange of power, instead of going back to the way of the ancestors and how they viewed the land, we stayed under that mindset of land as a commodity, right? So even in principle of that, that's how something like this deal can even be put on the table. And
yeah.
but what is the purpose of promising something like this when the economy is in such a place where the people who are, you know, indigenously from Zimbabwe can barely support themselves under the current economy? Why would a decision be made to even offer such a thing like this to the people who came to colonize it?
It's a conversation that is I am following. A lot of people are. It's a massive debate just now. You know, lots of people I'm in touch with are just, and I'm not quite sure what are the finalities of it. So I'm
Right,
following
right, right.
just to
Mm-hmm.
see what the real facts are. But yeah, it has certainly brought up a lot of debate because, you know, as anything, you know, land means much more than what we see with people. You know, there's displacement, issues of displacement, and all. So a lot of people internally displaced. We use those terms now, but at that time, there's a lot of internal displacement, and so yeah, I mean, it's a conversation that I'm watching quite closely just to see what is actually going on. You know, but yeah.
When I first heard about it, I was just thinking like, what could these Europeans possibly have over the president of Zimbabwe? Because it made me reflect and think about, you know, the case of the SAFA in West Africa, the 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 currency that's used by Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Togo, Cameroon, a lot of the other francophones speaking African nations still pay like a tribute annually to France. and France still has more control over the monetary systems of these countries than they do themselves, supposedly being sovereign nations.
Mm.
And when I'm thinking about, okay, Zimbabwe with a struggling economy is promising they're going, and what I've read was that they've even gone so much as it's going to be presented as a bond. So it's going to be a long-term bond that will be paid over time, which means that even more years of strain on the economy will come from this deal. And so Zimbabwe, having just paid off some of its national debt to the World Bank, is now about to ask for more aid, but not for its own people, but to pay for some arbitrary, you know, reparation type event for people who came with the intention of exploiting the land and colonizing the people. And so all I can do is think that there's something is afoot. Something must be, somebody is pulling the strings from behind the scenes, because it just doesn't make any sense on paper. It doesn't make any logical sense. It doesn't feel right. And so, just like you, I will be steadily looking on at the details of this and
Yeah.
trying to figure out how it came to be. But the fact that this news came out, somebody wanted this information out before everything was finalized. And, the conversation is sparked. And my goal is to present it to the diaspora so that we know certain things like this happen, so that we know the realities of what is constantly happening to our people, and the risk of us remaining isolated from one another.
Yeah.
And showing from past history of the successes that we as a people have gained when, as a diaspora, we've come together to overthrow, negative systems and find a way to create that momentum again, but sustain that momentum. Just look at how powerful it was when you saw people on the continent of Africa protesting for the death of George Floyd and holding up Black Lives Matter. You saw people in Europe doing it. You saw people in South America doing it, and they understood that this is wrongdoing. So we all have to stand up for this injustice. And I feel the exact same way when things are happening on the continent or anywhere else in the diaspora. I believe that when we come together to say, no, we will not stand for this, people will think twice. People will think three times. People will not engage in the exploitation of our people eventually, because they know that they have to deal with all of us. I want to give you the last word, and then, just let people know once again what it is you do and where they can find you, and, what you're working on.
Wow, Jamal, thank you so much. It's an honor, and it's great to reconnect and be on this platform now with you. And yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. And I think the mind has gone for a good walk today. Yeah, I'm my work is is continuing. I'm trying to bring the wisdom of the ancestors into the social space, the educational space, and make it, contribute and stand alongside other systems of knowledge that we have. And that remains my main focus. And yeah, my energy for that is sort of is like a spring. It just keeps coming. I know what it has meant for me personally, and I know what it means for many people who are also on that journey. So yeah, there's a lot to be done, and I think if we really pay attention to those wisdoms, it will take us to a really good place, I think, in how we're living our lives. And so sort of living this life not as an ideology, but as a practice, so I I'm so yeah, I'm currently working in a few partnerships, and specifically in Africa, working with young people. This is my main thing that I love. The one profession that I really love is teaching. And we had teachers, even the greats. I've had teachers, they teach the great and the good, and they they don't lose anything. We were talking about this thing earlier about feeling like you're losing something. Obama was talking to somebody, even William Shakespeare, an English teacher. We forget.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I love teaching as a practice, as a profession, as a calling, whatever it is. And I think teaching happens beyond the classroom as well. This is my big thing. I try to be. My dad had this thing that I want to share with everyone: of enter every situation as a student and expect to learn something. And I carry that with me. I think it's a valuable piece of. So yeah, I continue in that studentship of life, and trying to stand on humble ground as always, as my ancestors believed that humble ground is the most secure ground they could stand on. So that's what I'm trying to do. But I love creativity because it creates pathways between us that go beyond any kind of boundaries that we may set for ourselves or societal construct might set for us. So I always love that experience and being in other people's hands. I have made my journey here in Scotland with the help of many, many, many people who I couldn't have made this journey without. So, and that continues. And I hope I can offer that to other folks as well. So, yeah. And my last word is to just thank you for, I know the wonderful work that Afrikan Unity Initiative are doing, and there's a lot that you're doing, and it's good to see that you are strong and you are focused and you're keeping on this journey. And I look forward to more people joining the network or knowing about the network. So I'm spreading that word as best I can too. So yeah, I will.
I appreciate it. We need all. We need all the support. We need all the support that we can get as we continue to push. I wanted to thank you for taking the time to be on the show, to share your thoughts, to give that information. It was wonderful. I hope that everybody who has been listening learned something away from just the different ways that we can think, from the different ways that we can look at land, from the different ways that we can access our ancestors. One quote that kind of mirrors exactly what you were saying comes from Dr. Adelaide Sanford, and she says, "I've never encountered a problem that's insurmountable with the wisdom of the elders and the energy of the youth." I love that because it's so, promoting that intergenerational transformation where you still value what the elders have to offer and they value the youth and what it is that they will bring so that they can transform what they know into that energy to make it productive. And, there's so much we can do with that. And, if any of you want to get involved with Afrikan Unity Initiative or know more about what it is that we do as an organization, please come search for us at www.afrikanunity.us and look for us on social media everywhere at Afrikan Unity. Subscribe to our YouTube page, like, comment, and share these videos so that more people can be educated, more people can be in the loop of what's going on and the realities of us, because we want to give us that knowledge firsthand without having to hear it be propagandized and, twisted to benefit somebody else's, whatever, their particular scope. We want to hear it directly from the source. And this is what we're doing with this platform. I want to thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you guys next week on another episode of Distant Relatives. Peace.